Title: She said she was working out. I always thought our marriage was stable, if not perfect. Rachel and I had been together for 10 years, weathering everything from our first rented apartment to financial struggles, even a few months when I worked 2 jobs to buy our small flat. She was always energetic, a little dramatic, but that only added to her charm. We were different, but that was our strength. The first signs that something was wrong appeared a few months ago when Rachel decided to join a gym. She had never been a fan of exercise. She used to joke that her cardio was fast shopping at the mall. But now, she was obsessed with working out. "I want to look better by summer," she explained when I raised an eyebrow in surprise. I remember her adding, "You do want to see me in a nice swimsuit, right?" I just laughed and agreed. It was hard not to support her, even though this new hobby seemed a bit out of character. At first, I didn't suspect anything. Rachel came home from her workouts tired but satisfied. She showed me her new leggings, talked about the intensity of her sessions, and even boasted that her trainer, Jake, said she was progressing very quickly. I was happy for her. But then things started to change. Instead of spending an hour at the gym, Rachel began staying there for 2, sometimes 3 hours. She always had an excuse: yoga ran late. Jake decided to add cardio. I need to stretch after strength training. Her enthusiasm for fitness turned, to put it mildly, obsessive. She stopped watching our favorite evening shows with me, and even skipped our traditional Saturday breakfasts at our favorite cafe. When I joked, "What's with this Jake guy that you're spending more time with him than me?" she laughed but nervously. "Don't be jealous of the trainer, Michael," she replied with a sidelong glance. "He's just doing his job." Her changes began to irritate me. She became more secretive, spending more time on her phone and often smiling at the screen. When I asked what was so funny, she just shrugged and said, "Funny memes from the girls." But something about her tone felt fake. I started paying attention to the little things. How she always placed her phone face down. How she suspiciously ended conversations when I entered the room. One day, I accidentally saw her messages when she left her phone on the kitchen counter. The message was from Jake Trainer. "Tonight was amazing. You inspire me." My heart sank. Amazing? Inspire? What did that even mean? I didn't know for sure yet, but something bitter and hot began to churn inside me. When Rachel returned, I decided not to mention it. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the thought lodged itself in my head like a seed, growing into a thick vine of doubt. Over the next few days, I tried to act normal, but everything she did seemed suspicious. Everything changed the day I decided to pick her up from the gym. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision. I told her I'd be working late, but I finished early instead. I drove to the gym and saw her through the window. She was standing next to Jake, laughing, touching his shoulder. It wasn't just friendly banter. There was something else in her gaze, something I had never seen when she looked at me. Then it happened, the moment that turned my world upside down. She walked out of the gym, glanced around as if checking to make sure no one was watching, and quickly got into his car. Jake leaned over, and I saw their lips meet in a kiss. That was the moment when suspicion turned into certainty. I sat in my car, unable to move. The cold air seeped through the cracks in the window, but I didn't feel it. My heart pounded so loudly that it drowned out my thoughts. One word echoed in my mind: betrayal. I didn't follow them, though I wanted to. I was paralyzed by shock and a deep sense of betrayal. What had I done wrong? Why had she chosen him over me? Our life, our plans, suddenly seemed like a lie. Memories of our relationship flashed through my mind, each one now tainted by her deceit. That evening, I returned home earlier than she did. I sat in the dark kitchen, trying to piece my thoughts together. When she walked in, all smiles in her workout gear, I barely managed to hold back my anger. But I decided to wait for the right moment to confront her. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. "How was your workout?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "Great," she replied without stopping to meet my eyes. "You're home already?" "Yeah, I finished early. How's Jake?" I asked, deliberately saying his name. She paused for a second, but quickly regained her composure. "He's fine. Why do you ask?" Her voice was a little too casual. "Just curious." I smiled, but inside, I was boiling. This was the beginning of the end. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Rachel and Jake together in his car, her laughing at something he said, the way they kissed as though I didn't exist. I kept running the image through my mind, trying to find some explanation, something that would make this make sense. But there was no sense to be found. By the time morning came, I was exhausted, my thoughts tangled like a ball of wires. I decided to play it cool for now and gather more evidence before confronting her. It was cowardly, but I needed to be sure. I couldn't let her gaslight me into thinking I was crazy. The next day, I started paying closer attention. She left for the gym at the same time, in her usual leggings and sports bra, but this time, I noted how carefully she applied her makeup. Rachel had never been one to doll herself up for a workout before. When I asked her about it, she brushed me off, saying, "I just want to look decent." Is that a crime? I let it go but followed her after she left. I stayed far enough behind so she wouldn't notice me, my heart pounding as I tailed her car through town. She pulled into the gym parking lot, and I waited for a moment before getting out of my car. My plan was to walk in casually and see if I could catch her in the act, but instead, I saw Jake waiting for her at the entrance. They exchanged a quick hug, too quick for a couple, but too intimate for just a trainer and his client. For the next hour, I sat in my car, watching the gym from a distance, my paranoia eating me alive. When she finally left, she wasn't alone. Jake walked her to her car, his hand lightly brushing her back as they talked. I clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Later that evening, I checked her phone while she was in the shower. I knew it was wrong, but at this point, my trust had been obliterated. I needed answers. Her messages with Jake were buried beneath innocuous texts from friends and family, but once I found them, my suspicions were confirmed. "You looked amazing today," one message read. "I can't stop thinking about you," said another. There were even photos. A selfie of the two of them at the gym, her leaning into him, her smile radiant in a way I hadn't seen in years. My chest tightened, my breath shallow as I scrolled through their conversations. Each message felt like a knife to my heart. When I confronted her that night, I expected denial, excuses, maybe even an apology. What I got instead was something entirely different. "Rachel," I began, my voice trembling as I set her phone on the kitchen counter. "What is this?" She froze, her eyes darting between me and the screen. "Why are you going through my phone?" she snapped, her tone defensive. "You're spying on me now?" "Don't turn this around on me," I shot back. "I saw the messages. I saw the photos. How long has this been going on?" Her face hardened, and she crossed her arms. "It's not what you think," she said flatly. "Jake's just a friend. We've been spending a lot of time together, yes, but that's because he's helping me. He's my trainer." "Helping you with what? Sneaking around? Lying to me?" My voice rose, the anger I'd been bottling up finally spilling over. "Don't yell at me," she snapped. "You've been neglecting me for years, Michael. You don't care about how I feel, how I look. I needed someone who does." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. Was this my fault? Had I been so blind to her unhappiness that she sought comfort in someone else? But then I remembered the messages, the photos, the lies, and my pity for her evaporated. That night, she slept in the guest room. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how our lives had come to this. I'd loved her, worked tirelessly to give her everything she wanted, and this was how she repaid me. I felt a toxic cocktail of rage, sadness, and betrayal swirling inside me, and I knew things would never be the same. The air between us was heavy, the kind of silence that wasn't just quiet but filled with all the things we weren't saying. Rachel and I had turned into ghosts in our own home, slipping past each other like strangers, avoiding eye contact in a crowded hallway. I wanted answers, needed them, but I also knew that once I opened this door, there was no closing it. One night, after another dinner eaten in almost complete silence, I found her in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine. She looked up briefly, her eyes skimming over me like I was part of the furniture, before she turned back to the bottle. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though it felt like I was balancing on a tightrope. She didn't even pause. "About what?" she asked, her tone laced with irritation as she took a sip. She wouldn't meet my eyes. About Jake, I said, stepping closer to her. My voice cracked just slightly on his name. And about us. I need to know why this happened. What I did to deserve this. She let out a bitter laugh, setting her glass down so hard I thought it might shatter. You want to talk about why? She snapped, finally looking at me. Her eyes were sharp, almost daring me to keep pushing. Fine. Let's talk. Let's talk about how you've been more married to your job than to me. About how I've been invisible to you for years, Michael. Her words hit like a sucker punch, but I gritted my teeth and held my ground. So your solution was to sneak around? To lie to me? Instead of talking to me, you chose him? Her laugh this time was quieter, colder. She shook her head. Don't act like you're innocent. I've seen the way you look at other women. Don't think I didn't notice when you got that waitress's number last year. I blinked, completely thrown. What are you even talking about? That never happened. Oh, please, she said, waving her hand dismissively. You're not perfect, Michael. Don't sit there and act like this is all on me. I felt something snap inside me, a dam breaking after weeks of holding back. I leaned on the counter, gripping its edge to keep myself steady. This isn't about me, Rachel. This is about you lying to me. About you betraying everything we built over the last 10 years. Her gaze didn't falter, though I could see something flicker behind her eyes. Guilt? Defiance? I couldn't tell. You think I wanted this? She shot back, her voice rising. You think I wanted to hurt you? Jake. He just made me feel like I mattered. Like I wasn't just existing. What the hell does that even mean? I demanded. What could he possibly give you that I couldn't? Her silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she said, her voice quieter now. He gave me attention. He made me feel seen, Michael. Like I wasn't invisible. Her words sank into me like ice, freezing everything in their path. For a second, I wondered if she was right. Had I been so wrapped up in work, in making sure the bills were paid and the house was warm, that I'd stopped seeing her? But then I remembered Jake, the messages, the lies, and that brief moment of doubt hardened into anger. The conversation spiraled after that. She accused me of taking her for granted, of making her feel like a roommate instead of a wife. I fired back, pointing out that no amount of neglect justified betrayal. Our voices grew louder, each word sharper than the last, until we were saying things that couldn't be unsaid. I didn't mean for this to happen, she said at one point, tears streaming down her face. I felt so alone. You don't understand how lonely it's been. For a moment, I saw the Rachel I fell in love with. Vulnerable, raw. The person who used to light up every room she walked into. But then the image of her and Jake came roaring back, and whatever softness I felt evaporated. I might not understand, I said, my voice quieter now, but that doesn't make what you did okay. If you were unhappy, you should have told me. We could have worked on it. Instead, you chose to blow up everything we had. She didn't reply. Instead, she picked up her glass and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there, feeling like a piece of debris after a storm. My mind was a mess, a chaotic swirl of anger, sadness, betrayal, and deep down, a tiny, stubborn flicker of hope that maybe, somehow, this wasn't the end. But as the silence settled over the house once again, that hope felt smaller and smaller. The damage was too much, the trust too broken. I wasn't sure there was anything left to save. The days after our confrontation passed in a haze. I went to work, but my mind wasn't there. Every time I tried to focus on something, emails, meetings, even simple tasks, my thoughts drifted back to Rachel, to her words, to the image of her and Jake in his car. It was like a splinter lodged in my brain, impossible to ignore. At night, the house felt cavernous. The silence that used to feel peaceful now pressed on me like a weight. Rachel stayed in the guest room, and we spoke only when absolutely necessary. Even then, our words were clipped, devoid of emotion. It was like living with a stranger. I started questioning everything. Was I really the husband she painted me as? Neglectful, distant, too wrapped up in work to notice her slipping away? I replayed our last few years together, searching for moments when I could have done more, been better. And, sure, there were times when I worked late or forgot a special date, But wasn't that normal? Wasn't that just part of being a grown-up with responsibilities? But then her words would echo in my head. He made me feel seen. I hated how much they haunted me, how much they made me doubt myself. Because, deep down, I knew there was some truth to them. Somewhere along the way, we'd stopped being partners and started just existing beside each other. Still, that didn't excuse what she'd done. No matter how lonely she felt, she had choices. She could have talked to me, fought for us, instead of turning to Jake. One evening, after work, I found myself sitting in my car outside the gym. I don't even know why I went there. Maybe I wanted to confront Jake, to demand answers. Maybe I just wanted to see for myself what she found so irresistible about him. But I stayed in the car, gripping the steering wheel, my breath fogging up the windows as I stared at the entrance. When Rachel walked out, she wasn't with Jake. She was alone, her face drawn and tired. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity for her. But then I reminded myself of all the lies, all the secrets, and the pity evaporated. I drove home before she did, not wanting to face her yet. When she walked through the door, she didn't even look at me. She just mumbled a "hey" and went straight to the guest room. The distance between us felt insurmountable. One night, I broke down. I sat on the edge of our bed, my bed, now, and cried. Not the quiet, dignified kind of crying you see in movies, but the messy, gut-wrenching sobs that leave you gasping for air. I cried for the life we had, for the trust we'd lost, for the love that now felt tainted. But that breakdown also birthed clarity. I realized I couldn't keep letting her lies define my actions. I had to take control. The next day, I made a decision. It was time to confront Jake face to face. After work, I drove straight to the gym and waited outside until he came out. When I saw him, my pulse quickened, but I kept my composure. "Jake," I called out as he was about to get into his car. He turned, surprise flickering across his face before it settled into something like smugness. "You must be Michael," he said, folding his arms casually. "I take it you're here to talk about Rachel." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. "You think you can just slide into someone's marriage and not face the consequences?" He laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. "Look, man, whatever's going on between you and Rachel, that's between you two. She came to me." "She came to you?" I repeated, my anger rising. "You're her trainer, not her savior. You had no right." "She needed someone," he interrupted, his tone defensive now. "Someone who actually cared. That was it." Before I even realized what I was doing, my fist connected with his jaw. He staggered back, clutching his face, his smugness replaced by shock. "Stay away from my wife," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "And if I ever see you near her again, you'll regret it." When I got home, Rachel was waiting for me, her face pale. "Jake called," she said. "What did you do?" "What I should have done a long time ago," I replied. "Now it's your turn to answer for what you've done." Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw fear there. Not fear of me, but fear of the consequences finally catching up to her. The moment Rachel realized I wasn't going to let this go, her bravado started to crack. She sat down at the dining table, her hands clasped tightly, knuckles white against the wood. "Michael, I didn't mean for it to get this far," she started, her voice trembling but still carrying that defensive edge. "I made a mistake, okay? But you haven't been perfect either." I raised an eyebrow, my arms crossed. "This isn't about me, Rachel. This is about you betraying our marriage and then lying to my face about it. Don't think you can shift the blame and make this my fault." Her mouth opened, then closed, like she wanted to argue but didn't have the words. For a moment, I thought she might break down, show some real remorse. But instead, she straightened her back, her expression hardening. "You don't get it," she said, her voice rising. "Do you know how lonely I've felt? How small? You barely looked at me anymore, Michael. Jake made me feel alive again. He saw me." Her words, though meant to wound, only made me angrier. "You're telling me you destroyed our marriage because I didn't stroke your ego enough? That's your excuse?" I shook my head, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You had a choice, Rachel. to talk to me, to work on us. But instead, you went behind my back and made me look like a fool. The argument spiraled from there, every word cutting deeper than the last. She threw accusation after accusation at me, some valid, most not, all in an attempt to justify the unjustifiable. I fired back, unwilling to let her rewrite history to suit her narrative. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Enough, I shouted, slamming my hand down on the table. The sound echoed through the room, silencing her mid-sentence. You want to act like the victim here? Fine. But don't think for 1 second that I'm going to sit here and pretend this is okay. She flinched, her defiance faltering. For the first time, I saw a hint of regret in her eyes. What are you going to do? She asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm done trying to fix something you clearly don't care about anymore, I said, my tone cold and final. You can pack your things and go. Find somewhere else to stay. This is my house too, and I'm not leaving. Her eyes widened in shock. You're kicking me out? You made your choice, Rachel, I replied. Now you live with it. The next few days were a whirlwind of tension and packing. Rachel tried to reason with me, then begged, then got angry when I refused to budge. Each conversation left me feeling drained but resolute. The Rachel I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone I could barely recognize. Jake, meanwhile, stayed out of sight. I suspected he didn't want to risk another encounter after our last one. Good. If I never saw his smug face again, it would be too soon. The night Rachel left was oddly quiet. She loaded her bags into her car without saying a word, her expression a mix of anger and sadness. I stood in the doorway, watching her go, a hollow ache in my chest. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the lies, part of me still loved her, or at least, the version of her I used to know. As she drove away, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. The house was mine again. My life was mine again. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. In the days that followed, I started to rebuild. I threw myself into work, reconnected with friends I drifted away from, and even started therapy to process everything. It wasn't easy, and some days were harder than others, but slowly, I began to feel like myself again. Looking back, I realized that Rachel's betrayal, as painful as it was, forced me to confront truths I'd been avoiding for years. About our marriage, about myself, about what I wanted out of life. And while I wouldn't wish the experience on anyone, I came out of it stronger, clearer, and more determined to live authentically. The day Rachel left, I thought the worst was over, but I quickly realized that endings don't come cleanly. The house felt emptier than ever, the silence oppressive in ways I hadn't anticipated. Her absence was a shadow that lingered in every room, and I couldn't escape the echoes of our past. I stayed away from the gym. The thought of seeing Jake made my blood boil. But fate doesn't let you avoid your demons forever. A few weeks later, I saw him at a coffee shop, laughing with his friends like nothing had happened. He looked smug, untouched by the destruction he'd helped cause. I tried to walk away, but the sight of him enjoying himself while my life lay in pieces snapped something in me. When he left the cafe, I followed him outside. Jake, I called, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. He turned, his expression shifting from surprise to unease. Michael, he said cautiously, as if weighing his options. Look, man, I'm not trying to start anything. Good, I said, taking a step closer. Because I'm here to end it. Whatever you thought you had with Rachel, it's done. Stay away from her. Don't call her, don't text her, don't even think about her. Do you understand me? His jaw tightened, but he nodded. Yeah, I got it. Good, I said again, and this time, I meant it. I turned and walked away, the tension in my chest easing just slightly. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had reclaimed a piece of myself. At home, I began the slow process of rebuilding. The photos came off the walls, the reminders of our life together were boxed up, and the house started to feel like mine again. Therapy helped, though it wasn't a quick fix. Each session peeled back another layer of pain and doubt, forcing me to confront parts of myself I'd avoided for years. Then, one afternoon, Rachel called. She wanted to talk. Against my better judgment, I agreed. choosing a neutral cafe where we could meet. When I saw her, it was like seeing a ghost of the life we used to share. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice trembling. "I know I can't undo what I've done, but I needed to tell you that I regret it. All of it." I studied her face, looking for the woman I had once loved. She was there, but different, like a reflection in shattered glass. "I appreciate that," I said quietly, "but you and I both know there's no going back." Tears filled her eyes, and for a moment, she seemed lost for words. Finally, she said, "I hope you find happiness, Michael. I really do." "Maybe someday our paths will cross again," I replied, my tone firm but not unkind. "And if they do, it'll be a completely different story." She nodded, gave me a faint, bittersweet smile, and walked away. Watching her leave, I felt something unexpected: relief. The weight of everything we had been through began to lift, leaving room for something new. The months that followed weren't easy, but they were necessary. I reconnected with old friends, picked up hobbies I had long abandoned, and even started going out again. Slowly, the pain of Rachel's betrayal faded into a lesson, a hard, brutal lesson, but one that taught me resilience. Buddy, the golden retriever I adopted during those lonely weeks, became my constant companion. His goofy energy and unconditional loyalty reminded me that life moves forward, no matter how heavy the past feels. He pulled me out of my worst days, nudging me back toward the light with his wagging tail and boundless enthusiasm. Now, as I sit on the porch with Buddy lying at my feet, the sunset painting the sky in fiery colors, I feel something I haven't in a long time: peace. The storm is over, and I've come out the other side stronger. I've learned that life goes on, even when you think it can't, and that some endings are really just beginnings in disguise. The story isn't over. It's just starting a new chapter.